I stayed calm. That's the part everyone keeps asking me about. How did you stay calm? And honestly, I don't have a clean answer for that. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was 28 years of learning when to speak and when to let silence do the work. Maybe it was something I'd learned from my own father, who used to say that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. My daughter-in-law screamed at my wife in front of 63 people at my son's retirement party, and I set down my glass of wine, looked at her, and said nothing. That's where I need to start. My son Nolan is 41 years old. He retired early from the military, 12 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, 2 tours overseas, came home with a bad knee, and a commendation he keeps in a shoebox under the bed. He never wanted a fuss made about any of it. So when his wife Tamsin started planning a retirement celebration at the Riverview Banquet Hall in Mississauga last October, I had mixed feelings. Nolan isn't a party person, never has been, but Tamsin wanted the event, and what Tamsin wanted, Tamsin generally found a way to get. I should tell you about Tamsin. She's 36. She grew up outside Oakville. Her parents own a property management company that's done very well for itself over the last decade. She drives a white Audi that she talks about more than I'd consider normal. She's not a bad person. I want to say that clearly, or at least she wasn't always what she became. When Nolan first brought her home for Thanksgiving, maybe 5 years ago now, she was charming, attentive. She asked my wife about her garden and actually seemed interested in the answer. She helped clear the dishes without being asked. People can change, or maybe you just see more of who they already were once the first impression wears off. By the time the engagement happened, things were already shifting in ways I couldn't quite name. She'd stopped asking questions about other people and started redirecting conversations back to herself. Subtle at first, then less so. My wife, her name is June, and I should tell you about June. Noticed it before I did. June has a way of seeing things clearly without saying much about them. She just gets quiet in a particular way. I've learned over 31 years of marriage to pay attention to that quiet. She's not unkind, June said to me one night after Nolan and Tamsin left. She's just not really interested in anyone who can't do something for her. I told her she was being uncharitable. I was wrong about that. The retirement party was a Friday evening in mid-October. One of those nights that's still just barely warm enough to make you think summer isn't really gone. The hall was nice. Tamsin had good taste, you couldn't take that from her. Round tables, white linens, little arrangements of burgundy dahlias in the center of each one. She'd hired a photographer, had a slideshow running on a screen near the front of the room, photos of Nolan through the years. A lot of them were from his time in the forces, a few from their wedding, a handful from what she called their life together, which was mostly vacations they'd taken to places like Barcelona and the Maldives. I counted 3 photos of Nolan with June and me combined, out of maybe 40 slides. I noticed. I didn't say anything. June noticed too. I saw her face when the slideshow started. She watched it for a minute quietly, then picked up her wine and turned to talk to my brother-in-law at the next table. That's June. She doesn't make a scene, she adjusts. We'd been there about an hour and a half. Dinner was done. People were moving around, talking, that comfortable post-meal looseness, when everyone's had a drink or two, and the room gets a little louder. I was standing near the bar with Nolan's old friend from basic training, a big quiet man named Garrett, who I've always liked. We were talking about nothing in particular, the Leafs, the drive-in, whether the winter was going to come early, normal things. I heard it from across the room, not the words at first, just the tone, sharp and high, the kind of voice that cuts through background noise. I turned and I saw Tamsin standing near the head table, and June was a few feet away from her, and the body language was wrong. Everything was wrong. Tamsin's chin was up, and June's shoulders had gone very still, and the people immediately around them had gone quiet in that rippling way that spreads outward from a conflict before you even know what the conflict is about. I handed Garrett my drink and started walking. By the time I got close enough to hear, Tamsin was saying, not whispering, not the least bit concerned about who could hear her. I don't know why you'd come over here right now. Nobody asked for your input. This is our evening, not yours. June very quietly said, I was just asking if you needed help with. We don't need your help. Tamsin cut her off. We don't need you hovering. You've been hovering all night, and frankly, it's embarrassing. This is Nolan's night. Not a chance for you to make it about yourself. I watched my wife's face. She looked like someone had put something very cold against the back of her neck. And then Tamsin said, clearly, in front of 63 people, including Nolan's former commanding officer, 3 of his closest friends from the forces, and my 81-year-old mother-in-law who has a bad heart. I think you should go home. You're ruining the atmosphere. I stopped walking. Here's what I did not do. I did not raise my voice. I did not grab Tamsin by the arm. I did not make a scene, which is what every instinct I had was telling me to do. I am not a man who has ever struck anyone in anger, and I wasn't going to start. But I will tell you honestly that I stood there for 3 full seconds and I breathed. And in those 3 seconds, I made a decision about how the rest of the night was going to go. And the rest of a lot of things after that. I walked to June. I put my hand on her back. I said, loud enough for Tamsin to hear clearly, we're going to say goodbye to Nolan, and then we're going home. Tamsin said, good. I turned and looked at her then. Just looked. I didn't say a word. She held my gaze for maybe 2 seconds and then looked away. I found Nolan near the bar. He was talking to someone, laughing, and for a moment he didn't see me coming. When he turned and read my face, the laugh stopped. Dad, what? We're heading out, I said. Good event. You deserve to enjoy the rest of it. What happened? Did something? We're heading out, I said again. I'll call you. He looked past me to where June and Tamsin were. I don't know what he saw. I didn't look back. We got our coats. We drove home. June sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window the whole way, which is 35 minutes from Mississauga to our house in Burlington. Neither of us spoke until I pulled into the driveway. You okay? I said. No, she said, but I will be. We went inside. She made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and I thought about what I was going to do. I want to be honest about something, because this story is only worth telling if I'm honest about it. My son knew Tamsin had a problem with June. He'd known for at least 2 years. I know this because he told me indirectly in the way adult children tell you things without actually saying them. He'd mentioned tension once. He'd said June sometimes came on a bit strong, which is the most inaccurate description of my wife that I have ever heard in my life. But I let it go because I didn't want to fight about it. I'd let a lot of things go in the name of keeping peace with Nolan's marriage. That stopped on the night of the party. I didn't call Nolan the next day. I didn't call him the day after that. I waited. He called me on Sunday morning. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was about the weather, mostly. Casual, like nothing had happened. Like June hadn't been publicly humiliated in front of his commanding officer and my 81-year-old mother-in-law, who had to be driven home early because the stress triggered her arrhythmia. I texted him, give me some time, he replied. Okay. That was it for 2.5 weeks. In those 2.5 weeks, I did a few things. The first was that I talked to a lawyer. Not dramatically. I didn't have any legal angle here. Nobody had been physically harmed. But I have a business, a small commercial plumbing company that I've built over 24 years. And about 18 months prior, Tamsin's father, a man named Gilbert, who I'd met maybe 4 times, had come to me with a proposition. His property management company needed a reliable plumbing contractor for their buildings. I'd been his contractor for a 1.5 years. The arrangement was worth about $60,000 annually to my business. I called my lawyer to understand exactly where I stood if I ended that contract. The answer was, completely free. I had given Gilbert a 60-day notice clause in the agreement, which I had put there on the advice of that same lawyer when we first signed. I could walk away in 60 days with no penalty, no dispute, no complication. The only reason I hadn't ended the arrangement already was that it was good money, and I'd told myself the family relationship didn't affect the business one. I ended that thinking on day 3 after the party. The second thing I did was talk to June. Really talk. Not the way we'd been talking, which was carefully and around the edges. We sat at the kitchen table, same table I'd been sitting at the night of the party, and I said, tell me everything you haven't told me. She told me. It had been going on for almost 3 years. Small things that I'd either missed or she'd downplayed to protect me from a conflict with my son. Tamsin canceling plans at the last minute, always with a reason that couldn't really be argued with. Tamsin forwarding the family group chat to a couples-only format that somehow excluded us from things we would previously have been included in. Tamsin making comments about June's cooking at Christmas dinner, in a voice that was technically a compliment but wasn't. Tamsin telling Nolan that June called too often, that it was a lot, and Nolan telling June, gently, apologetically, but telling her to maybe text instead of call. June had been adjusting for 3 years, making herself smaller, not wanting to be the source of conflict in her son's marriage. Did Nolan know it bothered you? I asked. She looked at me. He knew. Nolan came over on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the party. He came alone. He sat down at, yes, the kitchen table, and he had the look of a man who has rehearsed something and has now forgotten it. "I'm sorry I didn't do more," he said. I looked at him for a moment. What would more have looked like? He didn't answer immediately. That was a good sign, actually. It meant he was taking the question seriously instead of just deflecting it. "I should have said something to Tamsin," he said. "Right there. I should have. I don't know." I froze. "You froze," I said. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like your mother stood in front of 60 people and got told to leave, and you were in the room and you didn't say her name." He looked at the table. "I know. Does Tamsin know you're here?" He hesitated. "No." I nodded. "Nolan, I'm going to say this once, and I'm not going to repeat it. I love you. That is not negotiable. But I am not going to pretend that what happened at your party was a misunderstanding or a difficult moment or anything other than what it was. Your wife publicly humiliated your mother, and you let it happen." I paused. "Those are two separate problems, and they both need to be addressed." He nodded. He looked exhausted. He probably was. "I need to talk to Mom," he said. "Yes, you do. And that conversation is between you and her. I'm not part of it." He talked to June that afternoon. I went for a drive. I don't know exactly what was said. June told me some of it later, but some of it I left between them. What I know is that by the time I got back, June had been crying, and Nolan had too, and they were sitting in the living room talking quietly about something that had nothing to do with Tamsin. That was a start. Tamsin called me 4 days later, a Tuesday evening around 7. I almost didn't pick up. She opened with, "I think there's been some misunderstanding about what happened at the party." I said there hasn't. Silence. "I was under a lot of pressure that night," she said. "The event took months to plan. I was stressed. If something came out wrong, Tamsin," I said, "I'm not interested in an explanation right now. I'm interested in whether you understand what you did. I'm trying to explain. You told my wife to go home. In front of 63 guests, including my mother-in-law who had to leave early because of it." I waited. "That's what happened. Not a misunderstanding, not something that came out wrong. That's what happened." Another silence. Longer this time. "What do you want me to do?" she said. The question had a slightly aggrieved edge to it that I noted. "That's not something I can answer for you," I said. "If you don't know what to do, that's worth thinking about." I ended the call. "Here's what I haven't told you yet. 6 weeks before the retirement party, 6 weeks, I want you to understand the timing. My wife and I had updated our will. We have a house in Burlington that's worth, in this market, somewhere north of 1.1 million. We have savings. We have the business. We have 2 properties in Nova Scotia, a cottage and a woodlot, that have been in my family since my parents bought them in 1987. In the previous version of our will, Nolan had been set to inherit everything equally with his sister Lee, who lives in Edmonton with her husband and their 2 kids. That was always the plan. Simple, fair, nothing complicated about it. We didn't change the will because of the party. I want to be clear about that. The party was the moment I saw something clearly, but we'd been talking, June and I, for over a year about what our estate plan actually said and whether it reflected our values. Specifically, whether the people we were including in it had demonstrated that they understood what family actually meant. Lee calls every Sunday. She'd driven 17 hours when June had her knee surgery 18 months ago, and stayed for a week without being asked. She sends cards on birthdays, paper cards, in the mail, for me and for June's mother, and for people she's never even met who matter to us. She does these things because that's who she is. We updated the will in August. We told no one. The new arrangement gave Lee a significantly larger share of the estate. Not all of it. Not a punishment designed to be precise. Just an honest reflection of the relationship that had been built and maintained, versus the one that had been taken for granted. I'm not going to tell you the exact numbers, because it's not really about the numbers, but I will tell you that the Nova Scotia properties went entirely to Lee, because they're family land, and she's the one who asked about their history, who brought her kids up there 2 summers ago, who knows the names of the trails. Nolan doesn't know any of this yet. That's not a threat. It's not a weapon I've been keeping in a drawer. It's simply a private decision that June and I made about our own lives and our own property and our own values. The paperwork exists. When the time comes, he'll know. In January, Tamsin asked June if she'd like to have lunch. June said yes. She called me from the parking lot of the restaurant afterward, and I could hear from her voice that it was complicated. Tamsin had been, June's word, careful, polished. She'd acknowledged the party in the way that people acknowledge things when they're not entirely sure what they're acknowledging. She said she'd been thinking about it. She said she hoped June wasn't still upset. She didn't say she was sorry. June told me this without editorial comment, which is itself a kind of comment. What are you thinking? I asked her. I'm thinking it's a start, she said. Not a finish, a start. That felt honest to me. It felt right. Nolan and I have been meeting for breakfast once a month since November. A diner near the highway, just the two of us, eggs and coffee, and the kind of conversation we used to have when he was first an adult. And we were figuring out how to be that, father and son, and not just parent and child. He's not the same person he was at the party. Or maybe he is the same person, and he's remembering it. I don't know which. I don't think it matters. He asked me once, about 2 months ago, if things were okay. Between all of us, he meant. I thought about how to answer that honestly. They're moving in the right direction, I said. That's not the same as okay. No, I said, it's not. He nodded and looked into his coffee. I think about that night a lot, he said. I'd expect you to, I said. You're a decent person, Nolan. Decent people think about the times they didn't act like it. He didn't say anything else for a while. We ate our eggs. The diner was warm and a little too bright, the way diners always are in January. And outside the window there was snow coming down in the slow, unhurried way that it does when it plans to stay. I'm going to do better, he said eventually. I looked at him. I know you are, I said, and I meant it. The thing about being a parent, the thing nobody really tells you before you do it, is that you don't get to stop, even when it's hard. Even when your child is 41 years old and a decorated veteran, and has let you down in a way that took the breath out of you in a banquet hall in Mississauga in October. You don't get to stop loving them. You just get to decide every day what that love looks like and what it requires of both of you. I stayed calm at the party, not because I didn't feel anything. I felt everything. I set down my wine glass and I walked across that room and I put my hand on my wife's back because that was the thing that needed doing. And sometimes the clearest form of love is just knowing what needs doing and doing it without drama. The rest of it, the contract, the will, the slow and careful work of rebuilding something that got broken, that's not revenge. I don't want to call it revenge. It's just the natural shape of things when you stop pretending that being family means accepting anything and start believing that it means earning each other, consistently, over time. June's garden came back strong this spring. She's out there most mornings now, before the heat of the day sets in. Sometimes I bring her coffee and we stand there together, looking at what she's grown. And we don't say much, because we don't need to. That's enough. That's more than enough.